I'd like to dedicate this, or we'd like to dedicate this to all the railroaders, their wives, deceased members, and everybody connected with CN Marine and everywhere. Okay, here we go. Okay, Walter. Come on and hop on board, boys, or you'll be left behind. For number one is leaving, she's pulling out on time. She's pulling out on time, boys, and headed all Pines West. Settle down, enjoy yourself on the Newfoundland Express.
He came out, I told her on the train, the first train to go through, and he told us cigars to everybody.
Yeah.
Yes, Tom and I were good friends up there.
Yes, you were.
Real good friends, because I think it's...
I was born in St. John's and educated here, and I came to work with CN November 1960. And I worked here till 1996, which makes 36 years. My uncle was superintendent of the dining car, and he was talking to his co-worker friend in church one Sunday, and he asked my uncle if he knew of anybody who would be a secretary. My uncle said, "Oh yeah, I have a niece who's just graduated from Prince of Wales Commercial." So anyway, I came down and had my interview and got the job. And I worked 10 years in the Express with him. I was the only girl. There were 53 men. Then in 1970, I went with CN Police, and I was there 13 years, from 1970 to 1983. When that disbanded, I went to work in the equipment department, and I retired the last day of CN, which was September 30th, 1996. And I was 54 years old. CN, I gotta say, were really, really good to their employees. Working here, we were just like a family. I don't know why we were like that, but we were, and like, we knew all about each other's families. We talked a lot, like, and on our breaks, and we socialized a lot. Like, we had Christmas parties, dinner and dances, and whatever. And we got to know everybody's spouse. And I gotta say, it was, I enjoyed, I gotta say, every day I went to work. I loved it.
Everybody tells me that I married June because I could get a free railway pass. So. No,
But
actually,
that's not true.
When my father actually was working there as a youngster, I used to get a pass, and I love the trains. I love the railway. That's my link now. So initially, when he started with the railway, it was actually owned and operated by the Reed Newfoundland Company. But that folded somewhere around 1923, and from 1923 to 26, the railway here was run by the Newfoundland government, and a commission was actually set up to run the railway. But then starting in 1926, that's when the Newfoundland Railway actually began. Before that, it was called the Newfoundland Government Railway, but 1926 it became the Newfoundland Railway, and it operated then right up to the time of Confederation. So in April 1949, that's when it became CN. So my father then went through all of those periods here, and he retired in '65, whereas the railway then folded somewhere around 1988. And that's why I'm involved now, although I wasn't directly involved with the railway. I'm now on the board of the CN Pensioners Association. I'm really thrilled with this organization and the way things are going and how they care for people and people that work with them over the years.
I was born in Whistlerville, 1934. Then I moved to Carmenville, and from Carmenville went to Fogo Island, from Fogo in St. John, 1949. 51, I joined CN. I was looking for a job. I was 17 years old looking for a job. So I happened going around the station, went upstairs to see Mr. Earl, and I asked him, do you have a yes? He said, we got to open here right away for you. So that next day I went out, a paintman in, and the paintman's job, you had to wash a lot of dishes. I washed more in my sleep than what I did in the car. Yeah, they were good years. I had that for maybe a couple of weeks. Then I moved out in the kitchen as second cook. I was there for a while. And then the job came up, waiter. I took that job. And then the next summer, I had a chance to bid on the porter's job. Porter's job, which I liked very much. I met a lot of people. A lot of letters came in to me. You're doing a good job. And that made me feel much better. I was seeing 38 years altogether, but not as a porter all the time. The gentleman was the manager chef. He retired, and I got his job. So I was there with the manager till two of us retired. We never had space. Be honest with you, I don't know how we done it. Because there you are with three men, and you have a kitchen, size this, we say, and over that comes a stove. You had a coal stove then, and every night you get her ready, and the trainman or conductor come back and light the stove about 5 o'clock in the morning for you. In late years we had our own sleeper, but those chairs was comfortable. You turn them into the wall, and you have a mattress about 2 inches thick, I guess. And you had one cot. A lot of people want the cot, so whoever gets there first, that's who got the cot. Everyone was good, but a lot of us, not too many of us left now. You know, every day I think you see one or two in the paper. They're gone, you know. But they were the good days, I guarantee you.
I was working with Bowaters from 1952 until early part of '53, and I went to visit my sister in Bishops Falls, and her husband was working with CN, and he told me that they were planning on hiring sometime that summer, so I went to inquire about a job, and I was fortunate enough to get one. June the 18th, '53, I hired on as a brakeman. I worked at that until in various aspects of the service, passenger service and freight service from Port aux Basques to St. John's, and mostly between Clarenville and Bishops Falls. And in the early '70s, I transferred to engine service. I was a locomotive engineer, and that was what I stayed at until the railway closed in December 22nd, '88. That's when I got my notice saying that I was finished. And that's when I took my retirement.
I come from a long line of railway relatives. My uncle Sam Dyack, he worked at Hotel Newfoundland. His father, my grandfather, George Dyack, was a stonemason at the Newfoundland Dockyard. My father, Victor Greenland, worked his whole career at the Newfoundland Dockyard as a shipwright. My brother David, he worked summer months in the dining car service and Newfoundland Express. I started in 1965 as a route aide at the CNT building on Water Street East. In those days, the railway had their own employment office, and they gave preference to sons or daughters of employees to join the service. So I started there, and I resigned 5 times, not knowing if I didn't like a job, I quit and go in the employment office and get a new one all the way. So I did that for 5 times before somebody said, you don't have to retire or resign to look for another job, and I didn't. So I stayed for 35 years. For maybe a year, I worked on the Newfoundland Express as a waiter, pantryman, waiter, that kind of stuff, and that was enjoyable. And then I went from there to the Newfoundland Dockyard. I worked as a labourer down there. Fantastic job. As you know, you get bumped, laid off, so you go back to employment office. So it was never a dull moment. And then on top of all that, as the railway started to shut down, I had to go and work in Deer Lake, Corner Brook, Stephenville. And that's where I retired from, Deer Lake, working with the Road Cruiser Department. And I'm sure I missed a dozen jobs between.
I was born in St. John's in 1927, in the west end of St. John's. I'm not a corner boy. I was born up in the country at that time. In 1943, I went to say I was 16 at the time, and so I spent 2 years on the North Atlantic during the Second World War. And after that, I went on passenger ships to New York, out of St. John's and New York and Halifax and the West Indies, South America. And I was with the Coast Guard before I joined CN Marine. And I was in the Arctic for 3 months. When I came home, I had 6 children, and my wife said, that's enough. So I decided to work with CN Marine. I went down, joined the coastal boats in 1960, and then my first coastal service was the Labrador, and I operated to Nain from St. John's and Bluesport and these places, and the coast, and in the summer months, and then in the fall we'd operate right around the northern Newfoundland to Corner Brook, and then the winter we'd operate on the south coast. When there was ice down there, we couldn't get down anyway. So we operated on the south coast. And for the first few years, I did operate on the south coast, and then I went on the Gulf service on the larger ships, you see. The first 2 years, I was the first mate when we were operating the Labrador. But I operated the Labrador for 10 years altogether, and but that was mostly master ships. So it was a good service. And actually we left here on a 21-day run, you know, and we had no contact, or very little. Only contact we had was in the morning. We called the office in the morning and tell them our schedule for that day, where we're going to be. That's the only contact we had. And once in a while they would call and ask for to go somewhere to pick up a patient, someone for hospital or something like that, and make a special trip for that, you know. But outside of that, we had no contact with the office at all. Everything, all the business was carried out right aboard the ship. You read a lot of books. There was no television in those days and very little radio. And so I really like going to sea. Before you're married, it's the best job in the world. You know? When you're young, and you're going around to different countries and different places, and you're getting paid for it. So what more do you want, you know?
I spent 3 years on a vessel before I went with the railway. I was 20 years old when I went with the railway. And I was just looking for a job, I guess. That's what I'm on to. I had made application at the time for to go to Battle Harbour, and that they were looking for operators down there. But I was after learning telegraphy in the station in Catalina, so I felt more or less obligated then to go to the railway. Because the same day that I was to go over to the Labrador to Battle Harbour, I had a call that I could go to the railway. And since I learnt telegraphy with the railway, I thought I'd better carry on. Well, after being on the boats, and anybody this was only smaller boats I was on, and after taking a rough beating on those smaller boats, I didn't have any desire then. We used to carry live lobsters from Pictou to Boston in the spring of the year, where there's so many, in the Bay of Fundy, the tides is 24 feet difference, which means that when the wind was against it, and the lobsters had to arrive in Boston alive, they were no good dead, so we had to, regardless of what the weather was, we had to go then. That was it. So that's kind of poised me. Well, I didn't get seasick. I got afraid a good many times. Well, you have to take so much of a beating, you kind of get tired. And my grandfather was lost at sea, and my grandmother was living with us at the time, and she didn't want me to go to sea anymore because he was never found, or no trace of the boat was ever found.
My father worked on the boat, and brother worked on the trains, and my brother-in-law worked in the station. I thought it was a good chance to start with the railway too. I learned telegraph at Gamble, and 6 months after I started working. I worked in every station from Portabass to St. John's as a relief. First 5 years I was doing relief work. You build up seniority and you bid on jobs. All jobs, they used to come on bid, and the senior applicant would get the job. So I worked at Deer Lake for 10 years. Then I bid off a job train dispatcher, and I trained in St. John's. So I was at that until I retired. I was the last person that worked in transportation with the railway in Newfoundland.
Well, I was born in Port Rexton, and well, I'm 86 years old now. I've done a bit of going around. Before I went on the trains, I started out on the lake boats. I was 16 when I went on the lake boats. I could have been home 2 months and got my baby bonus. Yeah. So I went out there as a deckhand, and then I worked my way up as a watchman and a wheelsman. So that's where I started. But, well, like I say, we used to go up there in April, and wouldn't get home until about a week before Christmas. There was no holidays. They paid you for their holidays all the time. So then I decided I'd try with the railway. I heard they were taking trainmen, so I went down and finally made the job with the railway. August the 8th, 1956, I made my first run. I only got about 2 or 3 months out of it that year, relieving for vacation. And then I got laid off, and they call you back. They had their own employment office down there, the NCA, and they used to hire us for down the dockyard or in the dock, you know, winter time while we were off. And when they get busy in the spring, the trains, work trains and wood trains going on, they'd want their trainmen back again. They wouldn't have to hire new men. So that's how I started out. I got my ticket in, conductor's ticket in '64. That's how long that was. When we lost our trains, I was the junior class conductor. So I didn't have much of a chance, I had 12 years on the train. And when we lost our passenger train, there was 15 men to get seniority ahead of me to get jobs. I used to get bumped in the seniority. I was going to only go where the seniority take you, And then I worked different places right through the railway, you know. First off, I was a crew clerk down there, and drove the truck, pick-up, delivery, a side transfer, and I ended up in the ticket office here in St. John's.
When I started work in 1950, I worked with with radio cabs, a taxi stand in St. John's. And there was a fellow used to come, was laid off in the winter time, and he used to come down driving the car there. And he was telling me about the job on the railway. I said, I think I'll try and get a job. Yes, he said, go up. He said, they're looking for men later on. He said, put your name in. And in June, they called me of 54. And I went to, I went up and I worked in the yard learning the trade, I suppose, for 5 days. And I had 2 days, one on the Carabinier branch and one on the Argentia branch. That's when the train go down and come back the same day. And then they sent me to Bishop Falls, and I had to write an exam for a trainman, and I passed that, and I came back and I started. The first day I went to work was June the 15th. And I went to Notre Dame Junction on a work train, and I was up there for a week, and I done a bit of flagging. I had the flag on the work train and that, and just learned the trade, I suppose, mostly, but I was underpaid at that time. I came up one time and the engineer said to me, you see those fellas back there, 2 fellas hoboing in the box, in a gondola car. And I had to go back and tell them to get off. Now I said, boys, you got to get off. But I didn't want to tell them to get off. You know, if I never seen them, I didn't know them. You know, what you don't see don't hurt you. And anyway, they got off. Now I said, I'm not looking at you where you're going to, but if you get aboard, keep your head down. And I believe they got aboard again, and they were going to Gander. And they got off, and they got on again. And went on to Gander. They got off in Gander.
Every trip was different, every one. There was never 2 trips alike when you go out. You talk about, you be out on the trains, and well, it's like something, if I was home for 2 or 3 days, it was like something got in your blood. You want to get out, get going. And that was it. You know.
My wife was a Brown from Windsor. So I used to work in Millertown Junction. I used to come down every week to visit her, you know. I used to stay in a boarding house, Windsor. So I got off at number 16 this day, and who should be on the platform but her grandfather. So this is the first time I met him now. He started quizzing me, you know. My son, he said, where'd you come from? I said, I came from Gamble. I see. He said, how come you went to work with the railway? I said, well, I don't know. I just fell in love with the railway. Because in Gamble, the powerhouse was there and the railway was 20 feet away. One thing led to another. He said, who would be your people now? He said, my grandfather was a roadmaster, Skipper Stephen Wilkes, they used to call him. And he looked at me. You don't mean to tell me here today that your skipper Stephen Wilkes' grandson? I said, yeah. Well, well, well. My son, he said, your grandfather was my closest friend in Millertown Junction. So we went up to his house. Now he said, you're not going to no more boarding houses. You're staying here with us. We were a unique breed. The camaraderie is
tight knit, yes.
Good,
yeah.
You know, we were a different breed of men and women. The women played a big role too, you know. Yeah.
And families too, you know. You take all my uncles, and you know, everybody worked with CN, whether it was the West Coast or all over. Seemed like it was the place, you know, to work CN, you know. Yeah. I guess being one of 7 boys, five of us worked with CN. My older brother started with CN, so I decided I was going to go to work for CN too. So I started as an apprentice in 1958 at the diesel shop in St. John's, 5-year apprenticeship program. I worked with CN for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, I guess, and I was on the road, back and forth, Port Bass. I was in Corner Brook, working on the road gang, doing pipe work and so on. And then I got transferred, and I worked at the dockyard for the last years of my working days, and that was 36 years altogether. But it was a good place to work. I mean, the money was good, Steve, too.
Oh,
Was,
God.
You know, at the time, there was...
It was a special place to work. I enjoyed every minute that I worked with CN. And the running trades, we call the trainmen and the engine and the operators and the train dispatchers, we were a unique breed. We were a breed that could be fighting in the morning, and when you go home in the evening, you bump into a guy in a beer tavern, which was common in them days. I thought he'd be your long lost friend.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Even though you had to be gone for out with him in the morning, you know.
Yeah.
But it was a good place to work.
We're all sort of like a family, and we look after each other. If there's anything you could do, or if you're going, what we call deadhead passenger from St. John's to Bishop Falls or something, or whatever the case may be, if it's on a freight train, they give you a bunk to get into. You go to sleep away and give you something to eat on the way along. And, you know, you sit up then and have a talk and that one, about different things and that, and all the news of the day, and passed along like that. I know there was one fella I worked with in Bishop Falls. I was with him on the freight train all winter, run between Bishop Falls and Clarenville. And he was a great singer. And in the night time when we going along, he'd be singing and I'd be singing along with him. And we have and you talk about time passing by. And you'd be gone along, I'd be looking out at the track going along, because you had to watch the track in case you go off the track. And he'd be in the seat behind me, and he'd be singing it up, and I'd be singing, help him sing. But we had great times.
Before the railway closed down, there were probably over 5,000 employees in this province working, and that was not only the CN, the rail, but also the marine, you know, the steamships, but also Canadian National Telegraphs. This was all part of the organization at that time. So it was quite a big organization here in Newfoundland. Even going back to Reed's day, when the railway started out early on, Newfoundland Railway, we had probably over 2,000 employees at that time. So it was a fair-sized organization. But it's hard to believe at this point in time, okay, everything is starting to fold here in this island. I was sad to see it disappear. It was hard to believe, but you could see that what was happening over time. You could see that earlier on, certainly during the war years and so on, quite a service there. The Americans came in, for example, and they used it extensively. A lot of freight was you know, transported around all over the island, not only in the train but steamships as well. But then I would say the turning point was probably around 1966 when they opened the Trans-Canada Highway here in Newfoundland. That's when the freight started to go down. So you could see, in fact, that not only did the freight go down, but the number of passengers traveling certainly reduced at the time, because then you could easily travel across the island. So I think it was a slow movement down, but that's what happened.
Well, I knew they were going to close down. It was inevitable that it was going to happen, you know, because, you know, the outports, there's roads to most of the main outports, and you get freight around in trucks. But the railway gave a great service to Newfoundland for 100 years. I mean, they brought doctors and nurses and mail. We used to carry the mail, all the mail back and forth from Labrador, and books for the libraries and things like that. So it was a good service.
We were locked up at the Delta that night, right?
Yeah.
And the next morning we were in a place with probably 100 people, and they gave us all the materials before they released it to the people. And we were still shocked. But now the union that I represented wasn't the end of the day for us. We survived for another 8 years here in Newfoundland, running the buses and the trucking arm. So it wasn't as devastating as the trainmen and the enginemen. They had no work.
It was a shock because we knew, as union reps, we knew things that the regular employee didn't know, it wasn't a surprise really, but a lot of younger employees were left in the lurch and, well, what am I going to do? Because the company wasn't going to protect everybody. The ones that was close to pension age, yes, they were, they were going to be looked after. But further on down the line, there was a lot of younger employees that had doubts about their future. Some of them went to the mainland with their, and some of them took training in other courses that CN paid for, and so they, apart from a few that really was only working 2 or 3 months a year anyhow, and had very little service, they sort of fell between the cracks.
When CN closed, a lot of people did. Most of them moved to Toronto. And in fact, some of them are still living in Toronto. They never came back after they retired. But CN offered jobs anywhere in Canada where you wanted to go to work. You could bump someone that had less seniority than you had, that was junior to you. You could bump and replace them. And I had a lot of friends that did go because they wanted to get their time in to get their full pension.
This all happened in 1996 with us. In 1988, when the railway shut down for 3-4 years, we're taking up the rails and stuff like that. But we never thought that they would get rid of our trucking arm or the bus operation, and that devastated a lot of people. But we still had opportunity to send them up to Canada to get work. We used to be called the Brotherhood Railway Airline Station Employees and Clerk, and that was changed. That was called BRAC. Then it was changed to the TCU, Transportation Communications International Union, and then the steelworkers after that. So basically I looked after the clerical, truck drivers, you name it, in CN, not the running trade from here to the other end of the island, plus the Marine Atlantic employees in Goose Bay and Argentia and St. John's. So I did all that while working full time. It was a big responsibility, but all in all, we didn't like the railway to go, and it was strictly a political decision, and we regretted it, but we had to make the most with what we had to deal with.
It was really sad. It was really sad, and I was back at where I started in the same office in the Express building in the same corner as where I started 36 years before that. And we were packing up, and well, months before there were rumors that the railway was going to close. We were all surmising different things and wondering what was going to happen, wondering, if we were going to get full pensions, wondering if we were still going to keep our CN passes. And like the CN pass, for me personally, was a big thing because I used the CN pass a lot to travel, and especially on the mainland. There was a lot of worry the last few months and tension the last few months that we worked. But everybody chipped in and everybody did their share, and we just worked along the same as if the railway wasn't going to close, was going to be here forever. But it was sad. The last day was really sad, and I was here the last day.
The last day, just before when they cut out the stations, that was the beginning of the last. What they did, they took the agents. My job at Lewisworth at that time was agent operator. And they took all the agents of the station and kind of demoted them. They gave you the same pay, but they kind of demoted them. So for us, and so the junior, when we were back, then the junior operator, he had to go. You see, this is the way that was. And nobody really was too happy in the last few years, you know, because we knew the knife was coming, but we didn't know exactly when, you know what I mean? But then when it struck, it took us all by surprise, so to speak, you know. But we stayed, the railroaders were a family. We lived together in staff houses, you know, where there was staff. I was just 4 across the line. And we lived there, everybody together, trainmen and enginemen and operators. We all lived together.
I was assistant chief. I was chief dispatcher here in St. John's. The word got out that the railway was going to close in 1988, so the superintendent called me in the office and said he was leaving the job. He was being retired. There was only a few people going to stay behind to oversee the dismantling of the railway. So he asked me would I be satisfied to go on the road and supervise crews, engine crews and train crews to see that the dismantling of the railway goes along according to oil, you know. Well, there was a lot of angst, anxiety, that people were losing their jobs, you know. But they settled down to it and they all got good compensation and everything, you know. But it was sad to see.
It ended up on the last one. I had to go out and get it, you know, I wasn't old enough to get my pension, so I had to go out and help take up the rail. And that was the saddest days. But I had to go out, I was up around Port Blandford taking up the rail and so on. And that was it, I had 36 years then. And at that time I was old enough to retire and get my pension. So.
The last days, 2 years, they were taking up the track. And there was 2 of us left. We were junior dispatchers. And we were the youngest dispatchers. So we were under 55. We worked, 2 of us worked to work trains until the rail was all taken off. Then we were still under 55, and then we were on security, and that consisted of driving bus drivers back and forth to the hotel and patrolling the yard and just punching time. And finally closed. The other guy reached 55 before me, so he retired. And I reached 55 in June, or in November, but I went out in June. And with a handshake, and that was it. I wasn't looking good for several years, and it was politics. And we never had much going for us. Everyone was against it. And I was one of the lucky ones, I guess. I was almost 55 and I got a pension. So I'm still here.
Well, it's pretty sad because, well, you know, where I grew up in Bishop Falls, I mean, it was a railway town. Everybody worked for the railway pretty well. And with the 2 railways there, it was a big part of growing up. And they'd call up in Bishop Falls because Bishop Falls was one of the main stops, and was crew changes and so on. And they'd load up the train with coal, tender, and when to come by our place, our house, the track was very close to our fence, and some of the coal would fall off the tender, and we'd have the buckets then, and we'd bucket and pick it up, and we used to get 10 cents a bucket then for the coal because everybody burned wood then, you know. And coal was a real, wow, that was great, that bit of coal. So we did that lots of times, and we were known to when we were a bit older, 12, 13, 14, the train would come through very slowly when we were going along the crossings, and we'd climb on top of the boxcars and run on top. And it was a challenge who'd go, how many boxcars you could get before the train would get out, you know, and we'd get down off them. And yeah, the train was big time.
One of the memories I have, in fact, when I was a kid, even growing up, traveling, I used to travel quite a lot on the train. I had got a free pass too. My father worked with the railway, but what I really used to enjoy was the dining car. That service was really something to talk about there, because in those days they used to have linen tablecloths, they had silverware, all kinds of fancy, and the food was really something to talk about. So I think for many people, traveling the train was special, but particularly the dining car service.
Seeing was a good place to work, and I thought of it a few times. There's not one there would argue against each other. Everyone's a friend. And go to a funeral would be, like I say, a dry eye in her, because you're missing a brother. Because you're asleep, one just will say, you know, you're all there together, right? And a lot of people, I don't know, when you look back at it, or the people that you met, and even to this day, they speak to you. Boy, that Simon was so good on train.
This is great, what I want to show you. You know what this is. Here, have a look through it.
Yes, I know.
Right?
Yeah. Autograph cipher calls.
Yeah.
I never saw it before though.
No?
No.
Oh, go away. As soon as I got seen that, I was like, I gotta show that to Graham. Right?
That's way back.
The pensioners have done a lot for me. I'm with the Avondale Railway Museum, and they've been so gracious, like letting me come in here and hang out on my way to work, and just like support, like information-wise, time-wise, or just a real good group of people, and their stories are just amazing, and I'm so happy like that their stories are being told, because it's the railway built the province, and a lot of people kind of take it for granted or don't realize. So the more stories we hear from these gentlemen, it's really exciting, and I'm really happy that they're putting up with me.
We are one of the few places in Canada. There's one in Moncton that has their own club rooms, and the one in Port of Ass, and here. They have a good social life out there, and we do too. We have our card games, our drop-ins, our dinners and stuff like that. So, and most of the wives get involved, or if they're a widow, they hopefully will come down and visit us and that. But they're getting older now, and it's harder to get them to come here. But we like our building so far.
89, that's when we started the pensioners, and I was one of the founding members of the pensioners. And there was quite a few that came to the meeting, and a lot of us got different jobs, and then I was on a different committee in that, and I was at that, like I say, two or 3 years or something. Then I just didn't apply anymore, because it takes a lot of time, you know. Those fellas here, Graham and Wayne, they're doing a wonderful job, you know, and they put the time in on it to keep the memories of the railway going. And the people, well, there's not too many left in St. John's now, or anywhere on the island. They're all passed away, because they're all old. I'm 86, a bit old, a few months older than Harold. And I had a good life at it, and I retired, and I got 31 years retired now, so I get a good pension out of it, and I'm quite satisfied.
I think the first meeting we had down at Wesley Church in the basement, I was there then, and I was involved with them for since they were formed, and I was the director there for a while. There was a big crowd there. That's what I remember most, was the people who were there. There was probably 150 people, 200 people there, and of course we lost that after a while. People died and people lost interest, you know. But I always cherish the time I spent with rail people.
I've been president 4 times. Started in 2004, and looks like I'm going to be president again now in January, so and you don't get off them jobs. But I must say, after we retired and in the association, everyone, you know, seemed to
we had Christmas parties every year.
Yeah.
After
we
we
used to go on
retired.
bus tours, but we're dying off, and then there's people sick and they can't. Railways closed 31 years, you know. So that's a long time. And the youngest now, they're not very young.
I was president of this for a couple of years. You know, we all went through it was pretty good. We had a pretty good association, a lot of members, but they're all after dying out, and it's a job to get anyone now to, you know, they're
a dying breed.
All dying breed, yeah, no doubt about it. Every year you do a report, and you know our list of retirees, and you know you read off 45 names, you know. That's right across the province now. But you know, it's a lot to lose out of here. But like I say, everybody's getting up there.
I used to enjoy coming here to
yes.
meet old friends and everything, you know, and talk about old times.
Yeah.
But that's going by the wayside, you know, we have to accept it, you know.
We're getting down now to a small number that go to these meetings, but at least it still stumps of the link. And support then as well. A lot of people, they've lost their spouse, for example, and this is a chance then for them to come together, and you know, it's like a big family.
Presently, I'm president of the Ladies Association, and we consist of former workers, pensioners, ladies, and spouses of the male pensioners, and we meet once a month. We have potlucks, we have socials outside, like at restaurants. We have Christmas party, and at our Christmas party we usually, instead of giving a gift to each other, we collect money and we give it to some special charitable organization here in St. John's. We also visit any sick members and bring them cards, let them know we're thinking about them, give them a phone call. It's a really, really nice get-together, and we formed about 15 years ago, and we called our group the Spikes. Just before the railway closed in 1996, my friend and I, and she worked in the manager's office, we organized a ladies get-together at Boring Park Bungalow. And we tried to get as many retired ladies that worked at the railway. We managed to get in touch with 65 ladies. And I remember everybody were so thrilled to see old friends, and there were women there that worked at the railway long before I went there, and they were quite old and they attended and they were thrilled. And it was a really wonderful experience for us all. And people still meet me today and say, remember that time you helped organize, it was my friend and I, that big reunion. It was a lot of work, but it was well worth it.
As soon as I was retired, I got involved being on their committees and stuff like that, and then I became like a vice president, and then finally a president. And we rotate every 2 years, and I went back to like briefly a treasurer and a secretary. And then when our national director died, I was already the national executive secretary for the 50,000 of us across Canada, and then I replaced him and I'm still a national director for the Newfoundland pensioners and also the national executive secretary for Canada. Meanwhile, I'm still president here, so you wear many hats to help out here. And we took a roll on. There's roughly 780 people out there now have life insurance policies. So when they die, their family don't know who to contact. They're always changing insurance companies, but it's a term life. So guess who they call? One of us. But we have the information, but we're under no legal, that was dismantled, but we took it on as a group here to maintain the order. And every time, even last week, I had a lady call me, so-and-so passed away. What do I do to get his insurance? Or working agreements that people had when they retired. They call us, who do we contact? So we are like an open line for those people to help them out, and we do it.
Recently, the CMPA, the CM Pensioner Association, their numbers were dropping at their monthly meetings. So the president, Wayne Greenland, and myself got together and brought it to our members, his members, and the members of the Spikes, and we decided to meet together once a month and have our meetings, and they're invited to our potluck too, and our card game, and it's working out just perfect. Wayne brings a lot of information. He's on the National Executive, and it is pertinent to the members of our Spikes group because they are CM pensioners too, even if they're spouses of CM pensioners. So it's really, really good for us to meet together, and we find it very interesting and very informative.
I spent a bit of time in Calgary and Edmonton at the seeing things, and I'm in Montreal with 3 or 4 of our locals there. People are retiring all the time. They're coming in as 55-year-olds and ready to go. But here, the average age now, I think, are probably 80 years old, 80 plus, and we don't have the new blood, as you call it, right, coming in to take over.
Well, eventually, you know, we're going to go the way of the dodo bird. I mean, there's nobody coming up from the bottom, falling off at the top. So whether it's 10 years' time or 20 years' time, but we'll cease to exist. And but until that time comes, we gotta keep together. That's handed down from our working days, because you know we were a family. You went to work, and if your next door neighbor was working with you, you went to work together in one car, and you know, you cooperated with your employers, and you get away from home, especially anybody in the train service. You leave home to be back the next day, and the next day could be 4 days' time. So a lot of things you ran out of, so your buddy that was working with you helped you out. You know, that's the type of a family we were. And this continues on even today amongst the ones that are retired. We look after each other.
The last train out of St. John's forevermore.
We're pulling out a convoy a little behind time, and soon we'll be in Port-au-Prince, the last stop on the line. The boat from North Sydney, which stops here as you guess, will take away our passengers off the Newfoundland Express. We'll take away our passengers off the Newfoundland Express.